Всем привет.
Hello there.
Меня зовут Абызов Артемий, и сейчас я хотел рассказать.
I am Artemi Abizov, and I wanted to tell you about port security. But I should probably start with a bit of introduction. It all started as yet another project this summer. I was asked to run an internal pen test in an organization,
Приезжаю,
and the entry point was in the office. Nothing special, right?
свой ноутбук, и
Now I take a patch cord out of workstation, I put it in my laptop, and nothing happens. Now, 15 minutes of troubleshooting later, I realized that they had port security running,
я потратил на изучение.
and this way, a 2-day-long project
Настолько глубоко
turned into a week-long project, as I had to learn a lot about port.
и хотел бы с вами ими поделиться.
In the end, I was able some not so obvious ways of
Я как
defeating port security.
работаю пентестером, занимаюсь преимущественно внутриком.
So I'm a penetration tester.
Всякие железки, контроллеры и прочее.
I'm a big fan of hardware and controllers.
Куда не денешь. Также
I still don't know enough about them, but I find it very interesting. And I've done a bunch of courses on networks from Cisco and Microtech, so I know something about this stuff as well.
что это такое?
Now about port security.
Аутентификация
Port
в
security
локальных сетях.
is an authentication method in local area networks, a technology that should protect you from connection of unauthorized people to your networks.
Табличку ассоциации.
So usually, in your routers, you have a table of associations of MAC addresses to ports.
И он
So if a table contains some data on a legitimate device and this device tries to connect,
если же
it will instantly and easily connect to the network. If an external device tries connecting,
А во-вторых,
A, its access will be limited, and B, much really depends on the kind of configurations you have. There are 3 possible cases. Number 1,
срабатывает
90% of cases.
и
Port security violation is triggered when an unauthorized device tries to connect, and there is no connection happening.
совсем для параноиков
So
вы можете просто
traffic is discarded.
в таком случае
You can even shut down the interface. This is the case for the paranoid.
в этом порту
So if this particular defense has been triggered, then you will not be able to connect to that port
интерфейс.
as long as the administrator doesn't restart the interface
Во-первых, надо понимать то,
on
что
the server.
аутентификация
Oh, I'm sorry, on the switch.
распознавание MAC-адресов.
So authentication is based on MAC address
Аутентификация, когда
matching.
токеном является
Do you have ideas how you can defeat it? When MAC address is the key token? Absolutely.
И мой любимый
Spoofing MAC addresses is not that difficult.
где-то в офисе,
So my favorite is finding a printer.
на котором можно найти
Usually, printers have very convenient
вкладку.
LCD displays that will helpfully tell you their MAC addresses.
Ну, окей,
Just go through the settings and copy the MAC address from there.
и этот пароль не
Now imagine that there is a password for that printer and it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so you cannot really spoof it. What else can you do? You can, I'm sorry, you cannot go to the settings, but then you can print the service page. It will contain the MAC address. Usually, printing service pages can be done without authentication.
то переходим в
From that moment on, it's easy.
выбираем
If you are on Windows, you go to Device Manager, you choose the network interface,
Advanced,
you go to Properties, Advanced,
адрес, устанавливаем наш новый MAC-адрес.
and then in Network Address, you set the new MAC address you've just discovered. If you are working on Linux, then MAC Changer
Security.
is your way to defeat port security.
Спасибо. Но подождите секунду. Wait a second.
Thank you so much, but wait a second.
О, да.
Why are we hearing this ghost music?
С этой штукой
8021X.
минимум. Что это
This kept me stupefied for 2 weeks.
продолжение Port Security
So this is a logical extension of port security,
в своей структуре и по логике работы.
which is so much more complicated in terms of its internal logic. You can even call it a framework, because different authentication methods are used under the hood.
Еще чего-нибудь. Итак,
With certificates and passwords and what have you.
они
There
работают.
are 3 entities that you need to know about.
Подключаемое устройство или же в терминологии
One is the client,
рабочая
or
станция.
the way they call it is supplicant.
Второе. Аутентификатор. или коммутатор.
This is the workstation we connect to the network. Next one is authenticator or switch, which is
Нашего
a
клиента.
kind of a gateway to which our client
Нужно
connects.
принимать решение, пропустить его или нет.
It is the device that actually makes a, go, no-go decision. The third element is the authentication server, which runs the database for user authentication.
А давайте просто разберем, как работает этого протокола.
Let's just talk about how the protocol works.
Во-первых, их можно выделить 4 штуки. Первый —
There
подключение
are
клиента.
four important stages. First one is new connection.
Новое устройство.
So upon connection, switch recognizes there is a new device trying to connect,
В этом состоянии
and it sets the port to unauthorized state. In that state, it will only allow 802.1x traffic through, something I'm showing over there in the picture.
аутентификатор
Next stage,
инициирует общение с клиентом.
authenticator initializes a session with the client
Также клиент может сам инициировать.
because they need to do their authentication. Alternatively, this interaction can be initiated by the client, depending on the current conditions.
Аутентификатором и передает его.
At this stage, they exchange their, notifiers or authentication data so that it's sent to authentication server.
Договаривается о методе, который
Now, the third stage is when the supplicant and server agree on authentication method that will work for both of them. Then they use this particular method for authentication.
происходит
If following authentication,
то порт переводится в состояние
everything is successful,
и любой
then the
трафик
port is set to authorized state, and then any traffic can go through it.
Берем про методы аутентификации, которые я
And let's talk about authentication methods I mentioned in steps 3 and 4.
MD5.
Now, the classic
Просто
case is EEP MD5.
аутентификация присылает
So
случайно
at a certain stage, authentication server sends a random challenge string, which is sent to the client, which then concatenates it with his password and login, takes its MD5 hash and sends it back.
значение, которое пришло от клиента
After that, the server will compare the value it got from the client with the one it calculated using its own data. If they match,
Самое интересное,
access is allowed. Easy peasy.
происходит в plain.
Moreover, transfer of all these messages happens,
Означает,
you guessed it, in plain text.
Все просто, получили доступ.
So we intercept it, we brute force it, we gain access.
Более продвинутый вариант. В этом случае
EAP, BEAP, a more advanced version of the same.
будет происходить
This time we have an encrypted tunnel inside which authentication stream happens. Now this way we are protected against MITM attack.
обязательно
The
проверить,
only problem here is that the client should by all means
что он
check the validity of the certificate. If that doesn't happen,
Третий вариант, наверное, самый продвинутый.
it can connect to any server for authentication. Next one, most advanced, is EAP TLS. This way, both the client and the server should have certificates. It sounds very secure, doesn't it?
И прочим устройствам.
Now,
Средства управления.
good luck. You deploy certificates to all the cameras and other devices
В настройках
that are not initially designed for certificates.
стрелочка подсвечена. Если она не стоит, то все плохо.
So, security type. If this tick is not there, you're in trouble.
Authentication bypass. Это
Now, MAC authentication bypass.
интересный механизм. В некоторой степени не то, что
That's a pretty interesting mechanism.
аутентификации EAP, но если вам нужно подключить
It's not really an authentication, EAP authentication method, but if you need to connect to an antediluvian device, that will probably be your only option.
и если клиент не
So here, you set up an exception if the client does not respond to 38021X authentication attempts. He can be authenticated using MAC address.
придет к нему. Поэтому
After that, the authenticator will allow in the first frame. This way, it will check the client's MAC address and will compare it to what's allowed in his database. And now the fun stuff. Let's hack it.
map.
But first,
Метод аутентификации, который
let's beat it up.
отменой MAC-адреса. Easy.
Naturally, this is another way of spoofing a MAC address.
Предложили почитать интересную книгу по тайм-менеджменту
Now,
системных
I was invited once to read a book about Time Manager for System Administrators. In one of the first pages,
менеджер будет
it said the good manager Whenever they have an opportunity to delegate a task, they will use it.
В контексте данной темы,
What am I trying to say here?
и у нас есть клиент, который готов аутентифицировать,
If I'm a pen tester
то, возможно, мне ничего
and I have a client that is prepared to authenticate on a server, all I got to do is give the client this opportunity. So we connect it to a port, it goes through authentication, and the port becomes authorized. And after that, it will allow all traffic through. The only problem is that this port has been taken up by the client.
включить двух клиентов.
It would be great if we could connect two clients
Что же поможет нам?
to the same port. What can help us there?
Спасибо.
Thank you very much.
Вы считаете,
It's charming how the speaker is waiting for applause every time.
пожалуйста,
Now,
кто-нибудь это?
What do you think will be particularly useful for this attack of all the options?
Да, действительно, Ethernet Hub.
Absolutely. Ethernet Hub is the best choice here.
Они использовались раньше.
For those who somehow don't know what that is, they used to be used instead of switches. These are particularly dumb devices. The only thing they do is accept a signal in one interface and then send it across the others.
Его между свечом с настроенной аутентификацией, подключаем клиента, подключаем атакующую машину.
So this is how we connect the client and the unauthorized client, and we make the attacking client similar to the authorized client by spoofing the MAC address and switching on the promiscuous mode.
Единственная проблема
That's it.
в таком случае у нас есть
We
два
are in.
устройства, которые пытаются
The
взаимодействовать.
only problem is that we have now two devices which are trying to talk to the network at the same time. There could be troubles with TCP connection because of the race condition. In my personal experience,
И все было довольно хорошо.
it did not really create any challenges. I found it pretty easy to scan the network. The only problem is the size of this device. Now imagine you come to a pen test with a device like this,
Это тот вариант, который у меня предоставил коллега.
and it takes up like half your bag.
Питание к нему примерно в половину.
And by the way, the power supply for this unit is twice as small. Now, this is not what you want to use for compact and, shall I say, camouflaged entry.
И разработать
Now, I decided to
что
circumvent this problem.
второе устройство
My first attempt failed.
в коммутаторе. После
The second device destroyed the port on my switch.
это мем про
And after that, yes, that was a meme about how large it was.
Что это такое?
And finally, I found this schematic.
Концентратор. Hub.
That's a passive hub for 3 ports.
Чистая физика. 24 диода, 3 порта, немножко проводов.
Physics for you.
Важно при-
24 diodes, 3 ports.
Например, ну, может,
Well, it does require soldering iron, and you absolutely need to read the safety instructions before you use it, just to make sure you're not electrocuted. 2 hours of soldering later, and I have this beautiful device. I've already explained what that is, right? It's a hub.
этого устройства.
I can even show it to you if you're interested, so that you see how compact it is. You know, it is the size of a matchbox.
Компонентов вы можете увидеть нарисованные на бумажке. Простите, я плохо работаю с компьютером.
You can also see the schematic. I'm sorry, I'm lousy with my computer skills are lousy, so I could not really draw it properly.
Записать, сфотографировать.
If you need commands to mount your attack, you can take a screenshot or whatever, but it's pretty intuitive, isn't it?
Второй вариант.
Perfect.
Если вы не хотите использовать хаб, то вы можете
Now, if you don't want to use a hub,
устройство с двумя интерфейсами.
instead, you can use any other device with 2 interfaces, set up a bridge between,
Инъекции своего трафика, настроить source NAT.
and then to inject your own traffic,
Получаете устройство,
you
которое
just need to set up source NAT.
за счет клиента. И
This way, you know, you can use client device for authentication and then bridge to your device.
использовал микрокомпьютер Orange Pi
Here I used Orange Pi R1 Plus LTS
и
microcomputer. I put ARM Bion on it,
также
and I was also running some additional software on top of it.
интерфейса для
But please note, it has 2 gigabit interfaces
третий для того, чтобы
to
управлять
send the traffic through,
либо
but you also need a third one in order to manage this device over SSH or whatever.
был вариант использовать
So I could either use USB Ethernet adapter or a Wi-Fi dongle.
то
But since I was trying to imitate creation of a backdoor here, I thought that using LT modem was easier
Стоит довольно
and
недорого и
more
позволяет подключаться.
reasonable. These modems are pretty cheap, and they allow you to connect
Просто поднимаем VPN
from
какой-нибудь
any distance. Really, after that,
профит.
we establish a VPN tunnel, and we do reverse SSH.
Хороших готовых
And
решений.
that's it. Profit.
Таких атак. Наиболее популярные из них.
There are some software solutions for mounting such attacks. Finrail is probably the best known one. Magomed Bazarov recently talked about this one, so I'm not going to mention it. Instead, I'd like to tell you about a different tool, which I personally found to be somewhat more interesting when it comes to more specialized attacks. I'm talking about Silent Bridge.
В 2015 году компания Digital Science
So back in 2018, a company called Digital Science ran their research around 8021.x.
момент атаки в одном из
And at that time, they collected all the attacks available at that time as part of the same tool, which made their pen test much faster, I guess.
нужно, я расписал все
In terms of configuration, it's pretty easy, and I have listed all the dependencies and all the stuff that you need to deploy. It took me 3 hours, so if you want to save time, by all means, take a photo.
Про логику работы этой атаки.
Let's move on.
У нас имеется
Now, this is about the logic behind this attack.
управление.
So we have 3 interfaces here. One is used for kind of management, and one is for connecting to the network. So one goes to the switch, another to authorized device, and after that we establish a bridge, and that requires a command that was shown in item 1. After that, through TCP dump,
Это потребуется
we need to collect some data in order to set up NAT. After that, we get interactive access through NAT.
Если
Easy peasy.
рабочую станцию, то есть некоторая вероятность.
The only thing is that if you get connected to a workstation, there is a probability that over time the workstation will hibernate. And in that state, when there is no active client, your connection will drop.
Взять микроконтроллер
In order to solve this problem,
стоит 150 рублей.
you can use a DigiSpark microcontroller, which costs you $2.
По-моему, 15 строчек.
Puts in it RDNA sketch, which is about 15 lines of code long, and that's it.
Раз в минуту
The only thing it is needed for
влево.
is that, it will move the cursor a couple of pixels left or right every minute. And this way, the computer will never go to sleep and you will be able to continue your attack.
Соответственно, методы аутентификации.
Now let's talk about
Ну, как я сказал,
some attacks
необходимо просто перехватить челлендж и респонс. Дальше все
against authentication methods. Like I said, first thing we need to do is intercept challenge and response.
то, что
However, there is an issue here.
Жан, который позволяет вам прослушивать.
When a bridge gets created, the bridge that would enable you to
Процесс
snoop on the traffic between the server and the client, the authentication process will already be completed and you will need to force the client to go through it again.
конфиг даун и в конфиг ап ничего не сработает. То есть в этом случае вам нужно либо
Doing it otherwise won't work.
начать аутентификацию заново со стороны клиента,
So you either need to run re-authentication, initiating it on the client side, because authenticator believes that our device and the client are just the same thing.
пару строчек кода на питоне и отправляем
And here we can use just a couple of lines of code on Python and send a request to re-authenticate. EAPL start. Or we can physically reconnect. Just, disconnect the cable and reconnect. The only problem here
который вы разместили.
is that if you deploy your device in an office where you don't think you will be allowed to enter again, that is possibly impossible. Or is
На
it?
самом деле, да, есть решение.
There is a solution. You got it.
Исследование Габриэла Райана в 2018 году.
In the same study by Gabriel Orion in 2018, they developed a very interesting concept.
Белую коробочку. Это Ethernet.
Note the white box. That's an Ethernet A-B splitter, mechanical one. So it has one input, two outputs. When you press a button,
выходов. На что не
it simply changes output switching
именно
on
что
the physical level.
кабель. Но
So
потребует
this way, you can sort of split the cable remotely. That will require some additional
ребята
magic, though.
проводили исследование ранее. Да, мне тоже ничего тут не видно, но это единственное доступное изображение.
You cannot see much in this circuit board. Unfortunately, that's the only photo we have. In order to manage those splitters, they decided to use
Ну,
a solenoid-based
для тех, кто не
system.
знает, это очень шумное, очень
Now, for those who don't know, solenoids tend to be very noisy and they tend to consume a lot of electricity. and size-wise, it's like a book by Tannenbaum.
На слайде, если кто-то захочет это собрать. Я изначально думал...
Individual components are shown in the slide if you want to assemble it. I initially toyed with this idea, but I decided against it. Total budget would be like $200 there. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but it seems suboptimal. What else can we do?
Но порта всего два, и также
It's a black box now.
такое.
Two ports, and the button as well. The same splitter,
То есть у него
but the components are electronic, no solenoids.
выхода и
So 3 ports, a button, several switches, and micro USB for a power supply. So I grabbed a couple of these devices.
20 распаял.
Now I attach them to each other with 2 by 20 bolts. Oh right, I removed the second capacitor in order to be able to manage this device with a single button push.
Начинает переключать
Now, in the original configuration, when you push the button, it starts switching between the output ports every second. Without the capacitor,
Ну и
you press once, you switch, that's it.
управлять.
No alternation.
контроллер.
Finally, in order to manage it remotely, I need a microcontroller.
Второй Raspberry Pi Pico.
I was choosing between Arduino Nano and Raspberry Pi Pico. And I chose Raspberry Pi Pico because color-wise, it's a better fit.
Теперь, как оно работает?
That's it for the hardware.
Во-первых,
Let's discuss software now.
скрипт на MicroPython.
Now, MicroPython script is loaded onto the controller. Then we provide management functions.
Питание, переключение режимов и
That's,
скрипт для сброса.
electricity supply, electricity off, and a script for kind of
Можно будет дергать через PySerial.
bringing it back to default state.
Стоимость примерно 15.
Individual functions can be called through PySerial. Total expenses $15. You should be able to assemble it all in a single evening.
То для чего, собственно, эта штука необходима? Потому что собирать...
Now
варианты
let's discuss
возможность просто переподключить
where you will want to use it.
как-то не очень круто. Расскажу про 802.1x 2010.
So 802.1x 2010.
2005 года. И по
The hub-based attack has been known since 2005. That's why various protections against spoofing and MITM have been developed.
шифрование трафика на канальном уровне.
In 2010, they solved this problem by adding traffic encryption at the channel level. So after authentication, we can no longer sniff the traffic.
Проверка целости пакетов. То есть
Next thing, they added packet integrity checks, which means that all the magic we did with bridges and source nets are not going to cut it. The only positive change
текст виде.
is that primary authentication is still happening in plain text.
Теперь,
Well, if this is the case, let's focus on it.
что я хочу сделать? Собираем
Now, let me tell you what I want to achieve here.
платный микрокомпьютер.
Now, we are developing here a device that includes a single circuit board, a computer, and our splitters, and we try to connect them in a ways that will make it possible for us to
Причем во втором случае это будет совершенно никак невозможно.
route the connection, so to speak, in different ways.
Единственная небольшая модификация, я добавил пассивный таб,
The only minor modification is that I added a passive tap, which is a device that enables us to sniff traffic on the physical level.
это LAN Throwing Star.
The most popular option
У многих из вас.
is a Lathrone Star from Hack5. I guess most of you have this device.
И заказать ее
I didn't.
сделал, поэтому что, правильно, неделю.
And I didn't have the time to order it.
Всё
So a week before the conference, I got my soldering iron out. So I found the schematic. Not that difficult, really. A couple of capacitors, a couple of wires. I was able to use leftovers from the previous hub project.
портов.
Well,
По размерам
it does look like an overgrown switch, if you ask me.
эргономику, потому что в оригинальном
Now I decided to improve ergonomics. The original device, as you can see, is not entirely clear on which interface is which.
два провода для снифинга, то вам приходится втыкать.
You gotta agree that,
Это не очень удобно.
if you want to do sniffing, you gotta insert 2 cables, and they will be pointing in different directions. Not the case with my solution, though.
С долей иронии.
I've been a bit ironic about it.
Простите, это лучшее, что я мог сделать.
I'm sorry, that was the best I could do, really.
Спасибо. Как видите на картинке,
Thank you.
требовалось использовать,
So as you can see from the picture,
поскольку у нас используется...
I had to use a USB splitter because I am using here two USB ports here. I also need the USB modem, and I need to connect the splitter, and they all connect to a single orange Pi USB port
Тап,
through a splitter naturally.
я уже ничего...
And then it all connects to a tap, and then it connects to the power supply network.
Конфигурации 802.1
Now, MD5 attack
довольно-таки просто.
in 8021X2010 configuration is pretty easy to run. So when the device is switched on, a physical channel is established connecting the authenticator and the new client.
Проходит аутентификацию, порт начинает пропускать любой...
So the client goes through authentication, port starts sending through all the traffic.
Что мы можем...
However, it's already MAC-SEC and it's difficult for us to defeat it. What we can do is disconnect the client.
Он теряет связь.
At that moment, the port becomes unauthorized, and it seems pretty bad, right? And the client tries to go through authentication again. At that moment, we start sniffing or listening to traffic through our two tap interfaces. And when the client is reconnected,
И все, что они передавали между друг другом.
we can catch both the challenge and the response they've been sending. The only problem we need to solve is to brute force the hash, but brute forcing MD5 is not that difficult.
Мы можем
After that, when we have the credentials,
полностью выключить нашего клиента из этой цепочки.
we can disconnect the client from that chain,
Мы получили доступ к сети. И
and boom, we have network access.
очень простая атака, но довольно-таки эффективно оказалась.
That's such a simple attack, but it proved to be pretty effective.
В случае, если настроен EAP TLS или EAP PIP, и там не стоит...
If it's a
про которую я говорил
EP
ранее,
beep, or if it's TLS and it doesn't have the tick I mentioned previously, there is another method,
мы поднимаем
the so-called rogue gateway attack.
фейковый сервер аутентификации.
Here, we started our microcomputer a fake authentication server.
Клиент
And
устанавливает доверительные
we
контакты
invite
между
traffic.
нами,
So a client establishes a trusted connection with us and sends to us the challenge response
там используется MS-CHAP V2.
using a different method. I think it's MS-CHAP V2 used there,
Требуемые нам данные, говорим спасибо.
which is also a brutable way of doing it. So we get the data that we need, say thank you, disconnect from the network, but use
Наверное,
both the challenge and the response to authenticate our own machine. That's it.
вынесет то,
And these are the links you may be interested in. I'm going to show here all the stuff that I found interesting in my own research. The first stage for me was an article by Muga Mabazarov.
802.1x.
So it was called A Large Guide for Testing the Network Channel Level. It was another major study by Digital Science in 2018. That's the second QR code.
Все способы, все...
In their large PDF, the team described various methods, various authentication scenarios.
Статья на Хабре.
Give it a read.
802.1x.
There is also a good Hubbard article on bypassing
Я уже упоминал.
8021X on LAN. And finally, Gabriel Ryan's report at DEF CON, the only place where you can see his original device and even hear the clacking of solenoids. This is it for me. I'm ready to take your questions.
Спасибо за доклад. Вопрос первый. Получается, если клиент
First question.
аутентифицирует с помощью логопаса, ты можешь его
So if a client gets authenticated via Logo Bus, you can do that. If they're doing certificate-based authentication,
Проверка целостности.
well,
Целостности
if
сертификата.
server certificate integrity check is not set up, the tick I showed, well, then you can do the rogue gateway attack.
даже ты вручную засунул?
Well, and if you have a PKI certificate,
Согласен. Это зависит
then
от
yes,
семейства конфигураций, которые могут быть
then
на
you're screwed.
станциях.
Indeed,
или еще
it does depend on
Вопрос, и когда ты
workstation configurations.
устройство, состоящее из множества чего-то,
So this
на тебя контроль.
whatchamacallit of yours,
Нет, не работает, потому что при сквозном включении
does it get trigger any defenses? Well, when you connect through and through, so to speak.
краски тапа в моем случае, но можно это сделать гораздо более красиво, используя готовые PCB-шки. В таком
It
случае
should not trigger any alerts really. I think that with tabs and PCBs you're fine. I think
Контроль даже на бриджи обычный ругает.
usually on switches, the storm controlling function will not even bridges. They will react to that.
не было
I haven't tested it like this,
на уровне,
but there were no collision detections in my band test.
ну,
So at the switching level,
в случае сквозного пропускания там чистые 100 мегабит.
Ладно, спасибо.
I was able to get 100 megabits, in this bridged arrangement. More questions, guys?
Добрый день, спасибо за доклад, очень интересно. И главный вопрос.
Hello, thanks for your presentation. Very interesting.
В прокат под вашим брендом.
When will this device be sold, and how are you going to brand it?
На настоящий момент
I'm working on it.
оптимизации кода, чтобы это все работало
Right now, I'm trying to optimize the code so that it works reliably every time.
поэтому
And I also want to do something about the cables
будут.
and wires. So when updates happen, you will be able to learn about them from my public group on Telegram, linked over there.
После того, как
The last two bypass methods you mentioned, after the client went through authentication, you would disconnect the client from the network. Would that be seen as suspicious for the client themselves?
Достаточно подозрительно, потому что
You're absolutely right.
активной сети.
Client losing access to corporate network
Либо в нерабочем,
while working
либо
doesn't look good.
да, нам
But my thinking was that we were mounting this attack
на самом деле это единственный способ
in out of business hours,
как раз
or when we don't really give a damn about what a particular client is gonna think.
пользоваться некоторыми удобствами и отдельными, может быть,
Well, this whole attack dates back to 2010, right? So there are conditions, there are constraints, let's put it like this.
Здравствуйте, спасибо за доклад. Подскажите, так
Hello, thanks for your presentation.
аутентификацию по сертификату
Да.
правильно настроена?
So how do I protect myself? Is it certification-based protection? Indeed, as of now, the best way to do that is to use certificate-based authentication. Make sure that you have this tick in the box in all your workstations, on all your workstations. If for some reason you need to use old devices, connect them through MAP or whatever. Oh, I'm sorry, connect it through MAP. The best way to do it is to do network segmentation,
Ну, и
so that protected devices are not put in the same group with unprotected ones.
Снифим трафик, да, с помощью вашего устройства?
And I understand that your device can also be used to sniff traffic.
Снифить все-таки трафик
Now, I'm wondering
и подменить
if we can sniff
вообще
traffic with certificates and thus spoof certificates. Do you think it's theoretically possible?
атаки на
From what I know, it isn't possible, because that would require attacking the cryptography, and I'm not the best positioned person for that. Here I was telling you about how to collect low-hanging fruit.
Если я правильно,
Thank you very much for this presentation.
это используется в процессе
If I got it right,
тиминга, и ты забегаешь с этим устройством куда-то его,
this is a red teaming attack, so you run with this device to an office and then you
какой тип
run away, more or less, right?
в этом случае
And
что устройство.
in this scenario, you don't really know which authentication type is used. Did you just keep your device there or what?
более сложным, с использованием сплиттеров и прочего. Оно подключается...
Do you know why I use splitters?
Оригинальный вариант, то есть просто двумя кабелями.
Now, I connect it with two cables.
Мы оставляем для себя максимальный простор для...
The only thing is that, this way
Возможно, на этот протокол.
we should be able to run any type of attack against that protocol.
Возможно, но в таком случае
If I cannot exploit a vulnerability, well, at least I'll know I did what I could. Everything I did.
Интересно было послушать. Вопрос
Hello, thank you very much. A very interesting presentation.
можно ли было это сделать как-то компактнее?
Given your experience, do you think you could have done it all in a more compact way? And how did you broach the hash?
на самом деле сейчас я продумаю, как можно распечатать все это дело на
Right now,
чтобы получилось цельное
I'm thinking about how I print it all in a single PCB so that I can put it all in a single box and make it look nicer
Я использую,
as regards
честно,
cracking the hash.
тулзы, которые подходят для...
I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the tool, which is good for brute forcing data such as challenge responses.
Спасибо за доклад. Подскажите, пожалуйста, после того, как мы успешно забайпасили
So after we've successfully bypassed
какие-то
a
планы
port,
по фингерпринтингу трафика с клиента, чтобы
do you
повторить
think we can say fingerprint client traffic
того актива, который...
so that we can reproduce the profile of an asset that has been
Звучит как
bypassed?
очень хорошая идея, потому что действительно
Frankly speaking, I haven't thought about that, but it does sound like a very smart idea because, you know, when you are doing red teaming, such devices
подвести весь проект к поражению.
can be
Поэтому, да, спасибо.
can be easily detected and can doom the whole red team project. So thank you very much for this observation. Do you have other questions, guys?
Нет? Ну тогда всем спасибо.
Well done. Thank you so much.
У меня есть возможность выбрать два лучших вопроса. И на
All right. I can select two best questions to award. And the first T-shirt
потому что
should go for the fingerprinting question.
нужно будет подумать.
Because you're absolutely right. That's something that needs to be considered.
Вопрос про
I also loved your question, sir.
Боже, я забыл.
I'm sorry. What was that? I forgot it.
Да. Да. Спасибо.
Yep. That's it. That's it. Thank you so much.